That could become a problem for Trump later because Weisselberg is a sought-after witness by these investigators who could want to use him against Trump. But at this point, it seems like it's a problem for Weisselberg personally.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, my conversation with the eminent reporter David Fahrenthold of The Washington Post. We talk about the investigations into former President Donald Trump and his organization, which entered a new chapter this week when the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, announced that her investigation has moved from a civil to a criminal one. I spoke with Fahrenthold on Thursday. To begin with, what's the significance of the announcement from the New York State Attorney General's office that the probe has shifted from civil to criminal? What does that mean?
Well, we don't know exactly what it means, but in general, this kind of shift means that the Attorney General has found a particular kind of evidence, and that is evidence that shows criminal intent. So the difference to think about between a civil investigation and a criminal investigation is that the civil investigation, you just have to prove that wrong was done. Somebody broke the laws. You don't have to show that somebody meant to break the laws. But if you have evidence that somebody understood what they were doing and broke the law anyway, willfully, with intent, that's criminal evidence. And so it seems to be an indication that the AG may have found something like that shows the intent of somebody, maybe not Trump himself, but maybe somebody in Trump's orbit.
Who might some of those people be? Do we know?
Well, there's been some reporting in CNN and the New York Times today that we are trying to match that says that they're focused on Alan Weisselberg, who is Trump's chief financial officer. He's been sort of Trump's eyes and ears in finances for 30 years. That's focused on tax problems in Alan Weisselberg's sort of personal capacity. Has he been getting benefits or perks from the Trump organization, not paying taxes on them? That could become a problem for Trump later because Weisselberg is a sought-after witness by these investigators who could want to use him against Trump. But at this point, it seems like it's a problem for Weisselberg personally.
In all the reporting that you have done over the years on the Trump organization, are there areas that stand out to you as, potential dangerous exposures for Trump himself?
Well, the key here, there are several areas that investigators seem to think that where the company may have done wrong. There's a giant tax break they got in Westchester County on an estate that Trump owns that the Attorney General seems to indicate she thinks Trump may have overvalued that land in order to increase the value of his tax break. There are questions about whether Trump paid the proper taxes on a $100 million+ loan that he got forgiven on his Chicago property. The question is about how do you prove Trump's personal intent if you want to charge him with a crime. He doesn't use email, but he does sort of converse with a lot of people, have meetings, call a lot of people, write notes. You'd probably have to find some kind of evidence showing that when the law was broken, it was Donald Trump that was behind it, understanding what he was doing and directing it.
So help us parse this. There is an investigation by the Manhattan DA, the outgoing Cy Vance, and now the New York State Attorney General. Are we still talking about separate investigations? What's the picture here?
Well, there are two investigations, but they appear to be more linked than they had been before. And it's important to know that these investigations basically are covering sort of the same ground. The Attorney General's investigation had been pretty fast-moving and focused. It was focused on 5 or 6 particular transactions. And the DA's investigation had been, let's vacuum up everything. Let's get all of Trump's tax returns and look at them and see what we find. And so they seem to have overlapped. The DA is interested in the sort of targeted things the AG was interested in, plus a bunch of other stuff. So there does seem to be some coordination now. I've reported that 2 folks from the AG's office are now sitting with the DA, working with them, maybe sharing some information. So they're not the same investigation, but they do seem to be sort of merging more than they had.
Is there any indication as to why the Attorney General's office announced that the probe had shifted from civil to criminal?
Well, they had to tell the Trump organization. They had made representations to the Trump organization last year that, look, we're conducting a civil investigation. It's not a criminal case. We're not working with any criminal prosecutors. And if that ever changes, we'll tell you. And so when it did change, they told them. They told the Trump org. And it seems like once they told the Trump organization that the Attorney General felt like they could say it aloud, tell the public as well.
What is the Trump organization doing now that Donald Trump is no longer president?
Well, it's still kind of chugging along on autopilot. It has shrunk pretty significantly from what it was when Trump took office, lost a lot of hotels. A lot of Trump's name has come down from a lot of buildings. But since he's left office and come back to the business, basically they haven't really done anything important. They've kept the properties they had. They haven't bought anything new or sold anything major. And if you look at testimony and statements by Trump's sons, Don Jr. and Eric, that's kind of vague about what role Trump actually is playing. I was reading a deposition recently with somebody asked Trump Jr., like, well, who's in charge now? Is your father in charge? And he's like, we're still kind of working that out. So it seems like Trump Sr. is very focused on politics, and the company itself seems to be kind of running on autopilot. But we'll see if that changes.
What's the role of Michael Cohen in all of this?
Well, it's really remarkable how, the sort of butterfly effect of these investigations. So really the only reason that the DA and the AG are doing these investigations is Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels has her alleged encounter with Trump in the latter stages of the 2016 campaign. She says she's going to tell her story and gets hush money payments. That sets off this chain of events that brings all this investigatory heat down on Trump. So Michael Cohen helps pay off Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen gets investigated, goes to jail. And as part of his investigation, he feels spurned by Trump and turns on Trump. So the guy who'd been the ultimate insider is now, on the outside telling Trump's secrets. Cohen's testimony, both about the way Trump handled those hush money payments and the way he handled other business things, how he inflated his assets allegedly to fool lenders and tax authorities, that's all from Cohen. And Cohen's testimony is what starts both the DA's investigation and the AG. So if you don't have Stormy, you don't have Cohen as a spurned witness, and if you don't have Cohen, you don't have these investigations.
After the word that the probe by the Attorney General had become a criminal probe, President Trump on his personal website now released a very long and kind of rambling statement saying that this was just the latest in a long line of witch hunt actions to dog Trump. What did you make of that statement? And does he have a point that Attorney General James, has had a target on Trump?
Well, it was a very, very long statement, as his statements now often are. He is right that while she was running for AG in 2018, James said, I'm going to take on Trump. And she talked about challenging his policies because he was president then, but also investigating his business. I don't think she said at the time, like, I'm going to get him no matter what. But I'm sure part of Trump's argument, if there are charges or a lawsuit brought, will be, look, this AG was out to get me from the very beginning. She told people even before she was in office she was out to get me. And the response from James is going to have to be, look, I can show you all the evidence. There's nothing about me that I'm using to make this case. I found all this stuff, and the evidence makes the case, not me. I mean, DAs and AGs are often elected, so I think there's often a charge that politics imbues what they do. They just have to prove that they followed the evidence and not their personal vendetta.
I mean, it would also be pretty rich for Trump to argue that politics had infected, the law side when he spent many years doing that himself.
This is a really interesting moment for Trump, as you said, because he has always used, both as president and before he was president, he's used the law as a weapon. Usually the law is something that works for him. He sues when he wants to. He settles when he wants to. He has the money and the lawyers and the political connection and the power when he was president to use the law however he wants. It's not the law is for him is not the way the law would be for you and me. If you and me, we would not want to get involved with the law under any circumstances. This is really a rare moment when Trump is on the back foot, when investigators have documents he sought to keep secret for a long time, are learning his secrets, and he is the one who's sort of responding to their demands. I don't know how it's going to end. He could end up exonerated. He could end up without any charges. But this moment of sort of vulnerability before the law is a really unusual thing in Trump's life.
Do you have any sense of the timeline here? I mean, we know Vance is leaving office, and he's tried to, take steps to make sure that this investigation will be strong even after him if it comes to that. But is this something that, seems imminent?
Well, you hear different opinions about this. Here's what I would say. The Attorney General's investigation has always been very targeted. It's been very narrow and very fast. It seemed like in August of last year, the Attorney General had identified the areas she thought were most important. It interviewed most of the witnesses, gathered documents, and was able to sort of say, there's a small set of documents that I need from Trump, and he still won't give me. So she went to a judge, and he got her those documents. It seemed like then, her investigation was close to being done. And maybe it's expanded a little bit because of new allegations about Alan Weisselberg. I don't think her investigation has very far to go. I don't know when she's going to file a lawsuit or charge anybody, but I don't think she's close. She thinks she's close to the end. The DA, on the other hand, only got in February millions of pages of documents of Trump's tax returns. There's just this giant trove of 8 years of the returns, which are voluminous, but also tax documents and other things like that. His folks have been going through them since then, but I don't think that he could possibly have sort of seen it all by now. The timing of Vance's, the DA's decision, I think is probably going to be mostly dictated by his decision to leave office. I think he's going to want to decide whether to press charges or whether to not before he hands this off to the next person. So there's a primary in June, there's an election in November. I think before that election, Vance will have made some sort of decision. But it could be tomorrow. I just don't think it's going to be next year.
Last thing, in all the years of reporting you've done now on Trump and the Trump organization, is there a white whale question or issue that you still, that you think about sometimes at 3 a.m.? Like, what's the key to understanding that you haven't gotten yet?
I have a whole herd of white whales. But the one thing that I would really love, and it seems like the Attorney General is focused on this, one of the most perplexing elements of Trump's finances has been this loan from his Chicago tower. So he got a $150 million loan on his tower in Chicago. After the financial crisis in 2008, the lender decided Trump couldn't pay most of it back and basically forgave more than $100 million worth of debt. Since then, Trump has listed this weird loan on his financial documents, his presidential financial disclosures, where he says that he owes a $50 million+ loan to an entity called Chicago Unit Acquisition. It's related to the Chicago Tower. But he owns that entity. So he owes $50 million to an entity that he himself owns, and which has no assets and no employees. It seems like those things are linked somehow. The question of whether Trump paid the proper taxes when his loan was forgiven has something to do with this weird loan that he's always listed as owing to himself. I would like somebody to figure that out. It's a huge amount of money, and it's a very strange situation. It seems like the AG is focused on figuring out whether Trump sought to avoid or evade taxes that he owed, and maybe that shell company was part of it.
David Fahrenthold of the Washington Post, thank you so much for taking this time for us, and thanks for your reporting. Hard to imagine where we would be without it, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.